Folks, good morning to you all. I know some of you are veterans at homeschooling. Some of you are trying to figure out how homeschooling works. What I'd like to do for the next 20 minutes or so is just talk a little bit about how you can make the most out of homeschooling. And veterans, feel free to roll your eyes at me and say, Colin, come on, tell us something we don't already know. But it's based on, my talk is based on two things. It's based on the fact that this is the 20th year of my being a principal. So I've been a principal of schools for 20 years. I've also worked right across the country in township, rural, peri-urban schools. And when I started Evolve Online School, Advotech hired me to start their homeschool model. I had the opportunity to take everything I'd ever learned about schools and trying to put it together in a model that would deliver the kind of schooling that I believe our children need in today's world. And I really do think that brick and mortar schools have really fallen very far behind of where they need to be. I'm not blaming them. A lot of that has to do with just the physical structure of a brick and mortar school and the limitations. As I say, I've been a principal for a long time and I've been principal of brick and mortar schools. Just the limitations of the very architecture is such that it makes it difficult for you to achieve interesting things in that kind of space. So when they asked me to start Evolve Online, I started by saying to myself, what is it that homeschool parents struggle most with? And can we develop something that addresses those difficulties? Can we develop something that will make it easier for parents who are wanting to homeschool to achieve that without compromising the very thing that makes homeschooling exceptional or special for children? Now, obviously, in this day and age, as the previous speaker said, homeschooling has become a little bit more mainstream than it used to be because of COVID. But actually, I personally believe that our world is moving in this direction automatically, that unless schools can adapt and create structures and environments that allow for the kind of flexibility that is the hallmark of homeschooling, they won't actually continue to be successful institutions. And it's that the hallmark of homeschooling that I want to talk about today. Please feel free to come in if you want to, sir. No, it's okay. So what is it that I think is the hallmark of homeschooling? The first thing I think is pacing. How fast or slow children move through the curriculum. In a traditional education, everybody marches to the same beat. You all have to learn the same things at the same time in the same way. And if you didn't learn them well, it's too bad because we have to move on to the next thing because that's what the curriculum says. And in a country like ours, there was a great need to introduce a curriculum to try and bring the quality of teaching and learning up to a minimum standard. It was desperately needed in our country, and it was what resulted in the development of CAPS. But we have to understand that CAPS is a lowest common denominator curriculum. It aims at making sure that everybody at least gets a baseline education. And it is by no means the kind of education that is aspirational, that is something that parents would aspire to having for their children. So going at your own pace is something that allows a child to take as long as they need to take in order to learn something thoroughly. Now, going at your own pace implies a model of education called mastery education. And mastery education is when you say to a child, you can do it again. We want you to get it wrong. It's great that you got it wrong. How interesting. We find it fascinating that you got it wrong. One of the phrases we use in Evolve is, oh, how interesting. All right, and we talk about the power of yet. It's not that you haven't learned it, it's just that you haven't learned it yet. All right? And that's fascinating. And maybe you'll never learn it. That's also okay. But you're learning other things. So when it comes to mastery, and I heard the previous speaker talk about, doing some basic stuff with the kids and then letting them choose their own pathway. Not a fan. All right? I'm not a fan as a professional educator. It will work, and it can work. And I'm not saying it doesn't work for children. But I don't think it is a model, certainly for a parent who's new to homeschooling. I don't think it is the best model for them to follow, because that knowing what a child should know or be able to do is what makes education arrive at a destination. So being eclectic and saying let the kids follow their hearts will arrive at a destination. But and that's exciting, because we don't know where they're going to end up. But that's the whole point. We don't know where they're going to end up. And you can still have elements of that. You can still have elements of, you are fascinated with robotics, so let's just give you more exposure to robotics. You don't have to sacrifice one or the other. You can achieve both. So having a mastery-based approach means that a child tries something, sees how they do, and then based on the results of their first attempt, they then improve what they did. This is something that traditional schooling cannot do, simply because the structures within a traditional school do not provide teachers with the kind of time they would need, or with the data and the resources they would need to be able to implement a process like that. Okay. So if you are looking at what curriculum you need to use for homeschooling, one of the questions you can look at is, what is their model? How do they think children learn? There's been an explosion of homeschooling options for parents since COVID. All right? And what you have is experts putting together structures and curriculums, people trying to mimic what happens in a school. I always find that so ironic in the homeschool market, trying to have a school behind a screen. The whole point about homeschooling is you're trying to get away from that model of education, not run to it. But that does work for some parents. The other thing that you're going to do by following a mastery learning approach is something called metacognition. It's learning how to learning how to think about your thinking. And that's a skill that will carry children forward throughout their lives. So the whole point, we use this phrase, 3 before me. So when a child has done the work and they get the answers back and that says you've got this right and you haven't got that right yet, we don't expect you to go to an adult to ask for the answers. We want you to have strategies that you can follow to try and find the answers yourself. So you have to try 3 things before you come to an adult for help. And you have to be able to describe the 3 things that you've tried. And if you're a homeschooling parent, and it doesn't matter what curriculum you've chosen for your children, this is a model that I would encourage you to adopt in your homeschooling. Okay? The model of saying, okay, this is interesting. I see you've tried this. You've given it a good bash. I see that there's some areas that you have struggled with. What can you do to try and improve the quality of what you've done? If you want to see a fascinating example of this, look for something on YouTube called Austin's Butterfly. Austin's Butterfly. It's a grade 1 teacher who teaches Austin how to draw a butterfly. Okay? And what's fascinating about that particular video is the difference between the first butterfly that Austin draws and the final butterfly that Austin draws. And I think he goes through about 5 or 6 iterations before he gets to the butterfly. And that feedback loop, that feedback is what you as a parent need to focus on. Not you've done it well or you've done it badly, but let's understand what you've done and let's understand where you were trying to go. And let's have a look at the gap between those 2 things. At Evolve, we use technology a lot. And while, again, I agree with the previous speaker about screen time, I'm not a fan of they must not see a screen until they're 12 years old. Okay, first of all, I don't think that's practical. And second of all, I don't think that's very useful. I agree with her that screens can be destructive to children's learning. And in fact, we talk about cognitive screen time versus sedentary screen time. Cognitive screen time is when you are actually engaging with what's on the screen. You're not just a passive recipient of what's on the screen. And sedentary screen time, of course, is when you're just tuned out and you're just receiving whatever is coming at you. And I think the type of screen time you want your child to have is cognitive screen time. And the sedentary screen time, you want to limit that. And again, you do want to limit the number of hours. The sort of hours that she spoke about, I thought were very sensible. 3 hours when they're younger and up to 5 hours when they're older. More than that is problematic. Okay. It's not that they have access to a screen. That's important. It's what they are doing with that access to a screen. That's important. That's what you have to control as a parent. And the brilliant thing about modern technology is that it provides parents with all the tools they need to be able to absolutely control what goes on the screen. We have an app that goes with our system called Jamf that has gives the parents a parent app that gives parents the ability to limit what happens on that screen. My teachers can also tap into it and basically switch children's screens off if they want to. Okay, or limit them to have access to only certain things. So that's what you want to control. Parents are often not brave enough, especially parents of teenagers, often don't have the courage to say to their children, and now the teenagers in the room are saying, don't tell my parents that. Okay. They're not brave enough to actually say, sorry, guy, you get 1 hour of social media a week. If you want more than 1 hour, you have to earn it. Okay? You have to earn it by showing that you've done things like go play outside, that you've done things like had a conversation with your family about something or washed the dishes for a change. Along with metacognition comes the concept of self-regulation. The other thing you want to look out for with your children is that are they learning to be self-regulators? Self-regulation implies, no worries. Self-regulation implies the ability to make a plan and to follow that plan. So you are going to want to have a schedule that you follow every day. It can't just be a free-for-all. It has to be, and it doesn't matter what's in the schedule. It's just that, from time X to time Y, we're working. Now, what we want our children to do is to make a plan as to what they're working on. And the nice thing about a mastery-based approach is it doesn't say you must write the test on day X at time Y, regardless of how you're feeling or whether or not you have a headache or what it is. Okay? It says, when you're ready, write the test. But we have what's called a pacing guide. You must have written the test by this date. We're not telling you exactly when to write the test, but we're telling you to keep going. And we want to measure that you are keeping going. So that's one of the things that I think is quite important in a homeschool, is keeping effective track of the progress that a child has made. If you choose a good product, you should get tools that allow you to do that. Okay, you should be able to get that information from the process. If you're not choosing a product, if you're following your own model, then that's one of the things I encourage you to develop in the model that you're going to follow. Know by when you want certain things to have been accomplished. And if you've got a formal curriculum that you've purchased to use in the space, or if you've got a teacher expert that you're using to help you with this, or if you yourself are a teacher, I wouldn't have to tell you this, obviously, because that's one of the features of a curriculum. A curriculum says children should learn these things by then. Okay. The other thing that is an incredible, let me just finish off on self-regulation. I can't emphasize enough the importance of self-regulation. I cannot emphasize it enough. It is the single biggest predictor of success for children in future life. There's a famous experiment that was done with marshmallows. I don't know how many of you know about the marshmallow experiment. You can find it on YouTube as well, where they put a little child in a room with the marshmallow and they say, I'm coming back just now. If you don't eat the marshmallow, I'll give you another marshmallow. But it's your marshmallow. If you want to eat it, you can. But if you don't eat the marshmallow, you'll earn a second marshmallow. Okay? And then they did studies of those children in later life. And they found that the children who didn't eat the marshmallow were the most successful in later life. I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, and I'm simplifying what actually is a very complex piece of research. But the effective outcome of that particular research, and it's been replicated again and again throughout the world. So it's not like one cuckoo guy in some corner of Australia tried it out and then wrote a whole book about it, which is, I'm afraid, how most educational theories emerged. Okay, so that self-regulation, that ability to say, I want to play Fortnite, but I've got maths to do. And I'm going to do the maths rather than play Fortnite. When a child gets there, I'm sure it's something I'm saying. I'm sure it is. I'm teasing you. When a child gets there, that child has, and don't expect your children to have that from the beginning, and also expect differences in your children as far as the ability to self-regulate is concerned, and also expect differences on a gender basis as well. Boys are notoriously bad at self-regulating. Okay, they are notorious. It's just true. Okay, not just boys though. I'm not generalizing. I mean, there are girls that are also terrible at self-regulating, but boys tend to be the sort of winners when it comes to the I can't self-regulate game. Okay. So the last thing I wanted to just talk about is something called interleaving. Interleaving is a cognitive concept where you combine subjects, where you combine. So it led to this myth. You may have heard of learning. What are they called? You know, when I'm a visual learner and I'm an auditory learner and I'm that's nonsense. It's not true. Okay, learning styles. That's what it's called. The truth is, and what research shows us, is that we all learn in all of those ways. Some of us learn certain things better in one of those ways, but that doesn't mean to say we're going to learn everything better in that way. Okay, so please don't label your children. If one thing that schools do that you're trying to avoid by homeschooling is you're trying to avoid that labeling that happens. Okay, so please don't label your children. Don't tell me that they're a visual learner. Yes, they are a visual learner, but they're also an auditory learner. They're also a kinetic learner. They learn different things in different ways. All right? And what I would say about this is when you can take multiple subjects and integrate them, and the example I always use is the way we teach children about momentum and life cycle of plants and wind erosion and political systems and protest art is by asking them to colonize Mars. Okay, so give your children projects to do, and make sure that when they're doing that project, they're learning a little bit of science, they're learning a little bit of history, because what you're doing is you're creating interconnecting neural pathways. So when I'm trying to remember about wind erosion, what helps me remember it is, oh yes, I had to choose where to land my colony because of how windy it is on Mars and how much sand there is there. Okay. So interleaving also leads to a concept known as what I call the cognitive hiccup. What you have to understand is that the brain is not designed to think. The brain is designed to make and follow patterns. Okay, that's what our brain does. It creates patterns for us to follow because actually it's a very low energy organ and it uses up its energy very quickly. So by making and following patterns, it's very energy efficient. And I'm sure you've all experienced when you've had to think hard, you're exhausted afterwards. Okay, And the only thing that fixes that is chocolate, I have to say. Okay. So, so I'm a diabetic, so that doesn't help me very much. I'm always exhausted, okay? So what I'm saying is, what a cognitive hiccup is it's when you ask a history question in the middle of a maths test. All right? Because what's happening is, as I'm doing my maths, my brain is slowly sinking into the laziness of following patterns, and that's how I make mistakes. I make mistakes because I stop concentrating hard enough. The cognitive hiccup, the sudden history question, stops my brain, interrupts the pattern. And then we're doing some research on this. The question is, after the cognitive hiccup, does a child do better on the rest of the maths test than if you didn't give them the cognitive hiccup? The research says yes. We're actually checking out to see whether that happens in our school as well. So the way we do that is we'll give some children a test with a cognitive hiccup and some children the same test without the cognitive hiccup. And we'll see how they do in the second half of that test. Okay. We are an organization that has tertiary institutions as well. We own the likes of Varsity College and Vega and Rosebank, Capsicum, that sort of thing. And we work incredibly closely with the School of Education at Varsity College. Our learning coaches, so we've got young people who come and they help children learn to self-regulate. They're fourth-year university students studying to be teachers. And all our learning coaches come from Varsity College, and they're the top 14 of the top 80 students in the 8 campuses across our country. And their job is to help our kids learn to self-regulate. That's the main reason we have learning coaches in our school. So that cognitive hiccup is something you can do. When your child is busy doing something, ask them a question that comes out of nowhere and see how they go. Making the most of homeschooling means understanding what the strengths of homeschooling are and then coming up with ways to overcome the difficulties. All right. I'm at a stand as well, but I've got 5 minutes for questions now. Does anybody have any questions?